Hello and welcome to the Selling's Creative Podcast, a podcast exploring creativity's role in sales from motivation, process, ideas, people, development, and success. I'm your host, Brad Eather, a digital communication sales consultant, helping businesses develop digital sales strategies and mentoring salespeople in the skill set of social selling. Today, I have the pleasure of being joined by James Michael, a sales veteran of over 30 years. Is it 30 years?
God, now you make me think about it. Yeah, I'm that old.
Yeah. A massive car enthusiast and owner of Justified Talent, a recruitment company specializing in helping small businesses employ their first sales hire with data-backed confidence. If you're interested in understanding the data backing creativity in sales, this episode's for you. Now, I'm particularly excited to be talking to James today for a few reasons. First, we're going to be getting into the data and exploring the role creativity plays in the top quartile of B2B solution sellers. Second, I'm certain there's going to be some real actionable takeaways that make you reconsider your selling approach. Third, we're undoubtedly going to hear some great insights and stories from the 1900s. And fourth, This is the first podcast where I'm going to have to issue an official language warning before we go any further. So with that out of the way, James, how the fuck are we?
Fucking good, mate. Thank you. What an intro. I'm good, mate. Thank you. Very good. Yeah. Happy to be here. Not sure about the 1900 stuff, but anyway, we'll get there.
So I wanted to kick off the conversation by pointing out to people that you're very outspoken about ageism in the workplace. And I was wondering if you could tell us a little bit about your experiences entering the job market at 55 and the spark that triggered that ended up becoming Justified Talent.
Yeah, sure. So, I mean, you grabbed a little important piece there, right? Age 55. So that was in 2018. I think, I can't do maths anymore. I'm 62 almost today, Alex. I'll turn 62 on Christmas Day this year. But at age 55, I had just come out of a corporate role and, highly qualified, like literally academically qualified, highly experienced, many years worth of experience, had been globally recognized by the organization that I'd just come out of for the various bits and pieces that I had, achieved with and for the business. And I applied for, coincidentally, 55 jobs. Right, no rhyme or reason to that number coinciding with my age. I think at the 55th application, I called it quits. So I applied for 55 roles over a period of a couple of months. I heard back from 3 recruiters. Right, I still haven't heard back from the other 52, so I'm guessing I probably didn't get the job. But yeah, as I sat back and thought, okay, hang on, what's going on here? I'm eminently qualified. I'm master's qualified, double degree qualified. I've got many years of experience. I've been acknowledged globally for the things that I've brought to businesses, and I'm not even getting a response. Oh, I know. I've just joined a minority group. I'm part of the old buggers group, apparently. It would seem that even in 2018 that maybe people felt like I was going to need a nana nap at 2 p.m. I probably wouldn't be able to spell IT, let alone use it. And so therefore it's time to consign me to the scrap heap. So that was one of 2 fairly significant catalysts for creating Justified Talent, because I kind of figured, if that's how recruiters are treating people, then I think there's room for somebody who does things a little bit differently. So that was the kind of starting point.
Yeah, great. And I want to get into how you're doing it differently in a little bit. But first off, I want to go back to the beginning. One of the topics that we explore on this podcast is what creative outlets we had as an adolescent. And I understand that school maybe wasn't the easiest place for you. You'd maybe consider yourself a bit of an introvert. So I'd love to hear about what school was like for you and what kind of creative activities you were getting involved in at lunch and how that maybe manifested itself in later years.
Yeah, sure. I guess to kick off with, I would never, ever, even still to this day, describe myself as being creative although I think I've got some creativity in me, what I tend to do, I think, is take existing things and either bolt them to something else to make it even better. So, the 2 + 2 = 5 kind of thing. But I've never been somebody who's been an ideator and a creator from Genesis, as it were. And yeah, I was introverted at school. I was a bit of a dorky kid. I've got a big nose, still have it today. So, kids used to love taking the mickey out of me for looking like Concord. And, I'm kind of fairly pale skinned kid and skinny, so I was the perfect archetype for somebody to kind of be picked on. I wasn't athletic and I wasn't even academic. It would have been fine had I been a real kind of nerd because I was super academic. I wasn't, I was bleedingly average. And so one of the ways in which I would escape all of that was, and like lots of introverts do, I would go into my mind. And that's where the creativity would kind of play. And so, one of my things, and you kind of kicked off by saying this, I've got a bit of a passion for nice cars and driving them as fast as I can within the bounds of the law and all that kind of thing. And that really kind of kicked off as a kid. So I spent a lot of my time after school playing with toy cars, and literally the entire lounge room would become a town or a village or a city, and I would be driving various cars all around on the floor. And in my imagination, I was in this town and I was in several of these cars. Over night time when I'd go to bed, once mum had said lights out, I'd sneak under the covers and turn the torch on, and I would have brochures of cars. And there's one in particular that I've got a really strong memory of the then Jaguar XJR, which was the 2-door Jag. And there's a scene where they've taken photographs of it. It's on, I think it's either New South Head Road or Double Bay Road. But it's in that kind of Double Bay, Rose Bay area. And so it's, it's a really glamorous setting, this really glamorous car. And I would turn the pages from seeing the car in full view from the outside to then turning the page and seeing it from the inside behind the steering wheel. And I would take that car for drives everywhere. That's kind of, what I would do in my imagination. At school then, one of the things that came about, and this was in some ways the beginning of my leadership journey, unbeknownst to me, where I would become the leader of, I don't know if we were all dorks and all nerds, but anyway, we would all drive around the playground at lunchtime, right? We would be in cars making car noises. We'd be doing gear changes and handbrake turns and sirens and all manner of different bits and pieces. But that was kind of my form of escape from the stuff that I didn't like at school, where I was being made to feel unwelcome, and I wasn't even academically gifted. So even the teachers didn't really think that much of me either.
Mm. It's interesting that you say that you weren't creative in that sense, because from an artistic point of view, collage, for example, is a perfect example of something that is built on another idea. And I know that later in this conversation, we're going to get into what create the data-backed creativity of sales. And I think that a lot of that creativity does play into what we're talking about. The other thing that I'd like to point out is this thing that was going on in your mind about cars and almost manifesting your future in a way. So I just want to ask, did you get the car?
No, I didn't get the Jaguar. I did get its kind of then later born kind of brother in that I got a Range Rover Vogue a number of years back. So it's kind of, almost of the same vein. It's from, their cousins, Jaguar Land Rover. It was as unreliable as every other Jaguar is, and cost a fortune to keep running. But no, I didn't get that car. I've had, plenty of nice cars since, and these days I drive an Audi SQ5, which is pretty nice. And didn't end up getting the Jaguar, but that's okay.
So talking about justified talent, obviously you got a very, very niche service. First sales hire for small businesses. what needs to be considered in that first sales hire? Like from a traditional recruitment agent, what's the differentiator there? What are you telling people that needs to be considered?
So let me kick off answering that by sharing some insights that came out of a really, really deep meta study, which was then subsequently published in the Harvard Business Review. And the distillation of that is that what most people consider to be the holy grail of recruitment and selection, particularly, is this kind of 5-point exercise where you call for a cover letter, you review a resume, you conduct an interview, maybe you do some personality assessments, and then you do reference checking, right? So they're the 5 kind of key elements of every recruitment exercise. Transpires the predictive reliability of those 5 things. So how often does it get it right? And I'll use some psychobabble terms here. So it's got a predictive reliability coefficient of 0.26, where the ideal number is 1. So what does that really mean? It gets it right 26% of the time. In lay terms, that's not exactly what it means, but for anybody else to kind of understand, what is he really saying there? It gets it right 26% of the time. Like you literally could do a coin toss and get a better result than, the long-held esteemed recruitment process. Right. Yeah. So the differentiator for us is, and again, let me perhaps cover this from another angle, right? So most people will probably be aware with the fact that, as we sit here today, the average tenure of a B2B salesperson is sitting somewhere between 16 and 18 months, right? I'm going to suggest that very few people jump out of their job at the 18 months mark at the peak of their career, at the zenith of their performance. Right, not in sales. It takes a good 3 years for you to really be hitting your peak, and we tend to find that the people who are high performers tend to hang around for that 3 to 5 year period, right? But the average tenure is 18 months at the moment. What we also know is that, and I kind of almost get sick of seeing this number because I've seen it now every year for the last decade, 56% of reps missed target last financial year, and the year before, and the year before, and the year before, and it's like this. 50 to 55 to 56 is that fairly common number. So there's all these people who leave fairly early in their career, and all these people who are, they're not hitting target. And if you look inside an organization, let's say there's an organization that might have 5 salespeople, just for the point of the conversation, they're all selling the same product or service into the same marketplace and same economy, the same ICP with the same problems, et cetera, et cetera. Hopefully they're all using the same playbook and they're getting the same kind of sales leadership. And yet half of them will be failing, and, the average of them will be leaving at the 18-month mark. So it begs the question, why? What's missing? Right. And so for us, it's about the hardwired makeup of the individual. Right, it's about what's in here, and yes, to some degree intellectually, but from a behavioural nature perspective, to what degree does my nature lend itself to success or not in selling? Right, and as it transpires, what we've been able to discern, and it's backed up by lots and lots of other kind of research, but over the last 6 or so years, what we've been able to discern is across the general population, there's probably only about 40% of the population who have got the natural hardwiring that will lend itself to success in selling.
Right? Yeah, and it's probably worthwhile mentioning at this point that you've got a psychology background as well. Correct. So a lot of what's been informed by the data that you're analyzing and then interpreting is through that lens.
Yeah, 100%. And so for us, then the differentiator, I'll just finish that piece off. The differentiator for us is that what we promise to our clients is that we will give them decision data, which is 300% more predictively reliable. So we take that number from 0.26 to 0.87. Right? We haven't been able to achieve a 1 yet. I doubt that we ever will, because humans aren't machines. They're not code. But yeah, we were able to take that number from 0.26 to 0.87. So increasing the reliability of the decision they're making.
Yeah, and if there's any small business owners out there listening, I'm sure you know the pain of the risk involved monetarily with taking on the first sales hire. If there's any salespeople out there that are looking to get into small business, I think there's going to be quite insightful next couple of half hour or so of conversation. What I wanted to ask is, obviously, everything that's just been discussed there is based on data analytics.
Yep.
What's your process in actually acquiring those insights that you're talking about?
So when people apply for a role with us, in addition to us obviously asking them about their career history, I mean, we don't ask for their resume and we don't ask for a cover letter. We do get them in our portal to tell us what their career history is, and we ask them for their LinkedIn URL, and then eventually we'll ask them to do what we call a cover video. But as they go through the usual kind of giving us their name, rank, and serial number kind of stuff, one of the very first things that we'll do immediately after that is we'll ask them to answer a series of screening questions, typically somewhere between 30 and 50 screening questions, which tend to be focused on the technical aspect of what it is that they're going to be selling, or the market they're going to be selling into, and their technical understanding of that, so their domain expertise, if you like. And then from there, they undertake what we call a temperament assessment. Right? The temperament assessment is a proprietary instrument that we have, and it takes people about 10 minutes to complete the assessment. And what we're using for specifically is to get an understanding of what their reaction to stress is going to be. Right, so the instrument's specifically designed, it represents in a kind of radar plot or a spider graph effect, and what we see is a blob of green growing or not growing. As levels of stress come on, we kind of see them heading in different directions, and grabbing a hold of what we kind of will describe as the tools in their tool bag. Right, and so what we're looking for is, are they grabbing the tools that are likely to be most effective at managing the stress of sales that still gets the right result? Assuming they go through that, if they get through that, the system gives them then a star rating. If they get a 3, 4, or 5 star rating, we'll then move them on to the next steps. And so through the course of their screening with us, they're actually going to work their way through 5 different assessments, each of which look at them from slightly different angles, different perspectives. So we're getting a very holistic picture of who they are and how they function, and what their natural hardwired state is. And we're then comparing that with benchmarks. So it sounds like it's a long and onerous process. And perhaps for some people it is, but we're fairly comfortable with the fact that we've had over 11,000 people apply for jobs with us in the last 6, almost now 7 years, and we've got a 4.3 star rating of them enjoying the application process.
So it's really interesting to hear that rather than experience, you're really focusing on the individual as a person, and maybe not necessarily looking at their career experience, but actually looking at their default state, what they're going to do in those moments of stress, how they're going to grab, like you said, grab the bit of them that they need to in that particular moment to handle a challenge or overcome a challenge.
Yeah,
which is obviously very, very different approach. You've got a guarantee as well, right? It sounds like I'm selling it, but like I just wanted to say that essentially what you've created, you're backing, you've got a guarantee in the back end of your process. So
correct. We guarantee the new hire for 6 months. So if for whatever reason they're failing to deliver and failing to achieve their KPIs or objectives at any stage during that 6 month period, then we'll go back to market and find a replacement. I will also kind of scratch my head and try and work out how the hell did that happen, because we've got this highly predictably reliable, suite of assessments, and all of the results have said yes, yes, yes. So, but yeah, we've got that replacement guarantee. Excuse me.
So we've been through all the data. This is how we've collected the data, and what comes out of it is what I want to talk about, because some of those insights that you've discovered speak directly to creativity's importance in the sales profession. And I mean, tell me, it may be skewed towards this first sales hire, or you believe that this is overarching sales behavior?
Yeah, it's overarching sales behavior, because the fact of the matter is, of the 11,000 people that have applied, every single one of them has been profiled, right? They will have come from all manner of different backgrounds. So they won't have come exclusively from small, the SMB sector. Many of them have come from enterprise. And what we consistently see is the people who are successful top quartile B2B solution sellers tend to form, there's a pattern in their behavior that is now predictable. Right. And so when we see people falling outside of that pattern, and if they fall too far outside of the pattern on too many of the things that we're measuring, we can clearly predict that they're going to struggle, in the role. Obviously, we do have to add in some different stuff, which we don't really scientifically measure for, but we've got to be able to kind of get our head around, will this person actually work out in an SMB versus where they've been in enterprise, right? And I was having this conversation with a business owner yesterday, where he was suggesting that we go hunt some people from enterprise for him. And one of the things that I kind of pointed out to him was that the challenge with that, not always, but sometimes the challenge with that is that, the person's used to sending a document to the print room, right? And then they wander down the hallway to the print room and they have a look at one of the 6 $30,000 color copiers to try and work out where did the document go to. In small business, the print room is called Officeworks, right? You need to head down the road and get that document printed. And so that whole kind of roll your sleeves up and no, you don't have an EA and no, you don't have a color printer, all those silly little things, but all of which kind of add up. And some people really don't cope all that well in that environment where, they don't have the infrastructure and the ecosystem around them that they're used to.
The support. And I presume culture is a massive part to play in small business as well, right?
Yeah, 100%. 100%. When you come from enterprise, you're used to having the annual sales kickoff, for example, right? And you've got a dedicated professional sales manager who, although this rarely happens, but, ideally is coaching you and mentoring you and all that kind of thing. When you come to a small business, you're kind of hoping the founder is going to do that, but they're probably not, because the founder ultimately, more often than not, is a technician in the thing that it is that they sell, right? Not a professional career sales manager or sales coach. So, those cultural impacts.
So I think now's probably a good time. I'm going to put up the slides. If you're listening along and you're on Spotify, you can click on the video, or if you're on YouTube, you're in the right place. But we're going to go through some graphics at the second to sort of paint a picture on what these benchmarks that we've talked about extrapolate into in terms of creativity.
Yep.
So I believe this is the first slide.
It is.
Optimism and resilience.
Yeah. So the tool that you can see that the Pentagon there is an Australian assessment. It's called the QO2. It's administered by an Aussie company up in Brisbane called Team Management Systems. They actually operate globally and they're well regarded all around the world. The QO2 tool, and so if I focus for a moment on QO2, the name of it, what it's measuring is the degree to which you have a quotient of focus on opportunities versus obstacles. So it's quotient, O2 is opportunities, obstacles, right? That's what it measures. The way that it does that is by doing an assessment of those 5 pieces around that pentagon, right? And
which
what
are
you see,
multi-pathways. Can you see my arrow?
No.
Right. So it's multi-pathways, time focus, fault finding, optimism, and moving towards goals.
Yep. Right. And what it's looking at is various aspects of that And it's measuring mindset. And so one of the things I'm often at pains to point out about this particular assessment is, unlike every other assessment that we look at or that we use that measures trait, this is actually measuring state, right? And there's a difference between hardwired traits and state. So this tool particularly looks at the state of your mind at the time that we take this snapshot, right? And where the creativity piece comes out is in the multi-pathways, right? So what that's particularly looking at is the degree to which you have a mindset that says when you come up against obstacles, to what degree are you going to be inclined to be looking for ways around, under, over? How are you going to deal with those setbacks? Or if you've got a low multi-pathway score, will that in fact cause you to kind of curl up in a ball and suck your thumb and cry for mummy, right? So the multi-pathways piece is one of the first areas in this tool where kind of sitting behind it is that notion of creativity. Uh-oh, this has just happened. How am I going to deal with that? That's the kernel of a creative thinking question, right? Now, sometimes what we can do is we can go to precedent and we can say, okay, well, how has this been dealt with in the past? So I'll use that, right? Mm-hmm. But sometimes what you're facing is perhaps something relatively new and you've not experienced it before. There isn't any precedent for you to call upon, particularly if you're in a solo sales environment in a small business. And so, yeah, that's measuring the inherent degree of creative thinking you have within you, specifically for the purposes of overcoming challenges and setbacks and things of that nature.
So almost talking about the lateral thinking in situations of challenges. Yeah.
The other one that's got creativity implied in it as well is the one down the bottom there, fault finding, right? Which kind of sounds weird. Like, why do we want somebody who's going to be finding fault? So, and this is a line that I learned, and maybe this is one of your references to the last century, which was the 20th century now, not the 19th.
I said the 1900s.
1900s, yeah. So something, a little saying that I heard way back in the 1900s was, the amateur salesperson is the one who believes that they have got this sale for sure in the bag right up to the moment they lose it, right? And they're blindsided by that. Right. So people who have a reasonable fault finding score who are in sales are the people who won't accept at face value what it is that the prospect is saying. Right. They will be asking themselves constantly, where could this go wrong? Who have I not spoken to? Who else somewhere else needs to do something else in order for this deal to kind of progress through the pipeline? Right. And so obviously you don't want a fault finding score that's too high in a salesperson, because that's just going to be, negative Nancy who's constantly focused on nothing but doom and gloom and misery. And they're kind of hard work to be around. But by the same token, what you don't want is somebody who's naive Nancy. You don't want the rose colored glasses individual who just thinks everything's la, 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 because they're going to get taken by surprise. Right. And so in that fault finding piece, again, what we're looking for is a degree of creative thinking, but it's creative thinking about where could this go wrong, which I know sounds odd putting the two of those together, right? But that's exactly what's going on. They're going into their imagination and saying, what have I missed? Where could this go off the rails? What have I not covered yet? Do I believe what she's telling me here? All that kind of stuff, right? So that's tapping into imagination, which of course is where creativity lives.
The next one, so this is actually probably capacity for learning, but when we were talking about the benchmark, this shows you what the benchmark is. So all those 11,000 entries that have come into a graph that essentially falls. Am I right in saying that 6, 7, and 8 for a capacity of learning is where the ideal sort of benchmark lies for this?
Right. Yeah. So this is a tool called the Profile Sales Assessment. there's an engine that sits behind it, which is called the Profile XT. It's administered by an American company called Profiles International, which is now owned by Wiley. But what you're seeing here is one of 18 factors, or STEMs as they're referred to in psych, that have shaped up to form part of the benchmark, right? So there are 18 graphs that we look at, and there are 18 aspects that we measure with this instrument. But this is one of them, and I think in this presentation we talk about 5 that have really stood out as being particularly important to get right in the sales hire, right? And so the idea here is that it subscribes to bell curve theory, the way it reports. So you've got that 1 to 10 scale. Typically 68% of Australians would land on either 4, 5, 6, or 7, right, on every one of the scales that we measure, right? And so what we're seeing here is, of those people who have been and continue to be top quartile B2B solution sellers today, their capacity for learning is slightly above the average. They're not Rhodes Scholars, right? So they're not 8, 9, 10, they're 6, 7, 8, right? That's where they land when we put them through the assessment, right? But the people who are top quartile performers have a capacity for learning which is slightly above the norm in the population, right? And that's become increasingly more important, we're finding today, for a whole raft of reasons, right? We find ourselves in a world today where if you haven't got a capacity for thinking, if you haven't got a capacity particularly for critical analysis, if you haven't got a capacity to soak up new technology, then you're going to be challenged. Right now, we're all being confronted by the large language models and by AI and all of the things that it can do. You know, the term, the sales tech stack, you know, that's a term I hadn't heard of 10, 15 years ago. But today, you know, I'm told that most salespeople, certainly in enterprise, are probably operating somewhere between 6 and 11 different platforms that require them to understand how to use them, right? So there's a whole bunch of stuff like that. The other piece that comes with it as well is we're no longer in the day and age where it's the brochure drop, the features and benefits sell, right? If you don't have the capacity to help your prospects make sense of the world, right? So we talk about this sense-making capacity in salespeople today. If you don't have the mental capacity to help make sense for your customers, if we think about the challenger selling model as well, right? To be a good quality challenger selling, that's not about being obnoxious and, you know, just being rude to people. It's about stopping and making them really think. And the only way you're going to do that is if you yourself can think, right, and articulate good, profound questions that cause people to stop in their tracks and think, wow, yeah, you know what, I'd never thought of that before. So we're finding, you know, that capacity for learning is a vital part of success in selling today. And sitting within capacity for learning is creative thinking, right? It's about ideation. And it may not be creation in its purest sense, but yeah, you've got to be able to kind of tap into that part of the brain that looks at things a little bit differently than is necessarily presented on the surface. Does that make sense?
Yeah, I'm going back to that collage idea where your capacity for learning, you're continually going out there picking little bits and pieces. And then, say, for example, yourself, you know, you've got a psychology degree, I've got a digital communications degree. But every time you learn something new, you sort of cherry pick it, put it back into your lens, your framework, and that becomes something new. This idea of collaging, you know, that's where your unique take on and understanding of a particular problem sort of comes to the fore.
Yeah, absolutely. And so one of the other pieces that's attached to capacity for learning is thirst for learning, right? And again, thirst for learning is where creativity, there's a kernel of creativity in there. Its genesis is creativity, that desire to know more, learn more, understand more, make sense of, all requires a kernel of creativity in there.
And it's funny, like thinking about enterprise, a lot of enterprise sellers are probably used to professional development days and things like that. But in the SMB space, people are more likely to have to go out and further their education by themselves.
Yeah.
So that thirst for learning's obviously a real strategic advantage if you've got a seller in that situation that's pushing the envelope.
Yeah, 100%.
So sociability, this is probably something that a lot of this is the thing that made me when you told me about this one took me in my tracks, because as a seller, you quite often think you're extroverted, you're going out there, you're being social. That's half of your job. But this suggests something slightly different.
Yeah, sure does. So, the myth of the successful salesperson is that they're out there socializing, eating and drinking for the country, and have the capacity to talk underwater with a mouthful of marbles, right? That's the classic age-old description of the salesperson, the raging extrovert. What we're finding, again, and it's based on the benchmarking, when we get the people who are the top quartile B2B solution sellers to undertake the assessment, they all land on 4, 5, or 6, right? So that makes them what we describe as ambiverts, right? So on the left is introvert, on the right is extrovert. And what we're finding with the successful top quartile sellers is that they're more ambiverted, right? And so,
which is a combination of both, right?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. So they're not overly extroverted. They're not overly introverted. It's almost like a bit of a Goldilocks bowl of porridge kind of thing. But to kind of give it some more sense, you can see the numbers there. 31% of the population will be more extroverted than these people, right? So where most folks, and for founders who are looking to recruit their salesperson, and if they're writing a job ad, and they may not put these explicit words in there, but they're probably thinking they need to find somebody who's extroverted. That's what they believe to be the power of a good salesperson, this willingness to get out there and have conversations. What's transpired is that's not the case. And so again, creativity lies in here, because what an ambivert is going to do is, by all means, yes, have the conversation, express points of view, share insights, socialize the idea of the service or the product or the offer. But then what they're going to do is step back, not withdraw, not go hide in a cave, so don't go down to 1-2 zone, but they'll step back and they'll adopt the curious mode. And we'll talk more about curiosity on one of the other scales in a moment. But what they're going to be doing now is posing questions, more and more questions, and it's about drawing the prospect into the conversation. And again, we've all heard the phrase, and it's a somewhat hackneyed phrase, and that is try to be more interested than interesting, right? And so we find that with the top quartile sales performers is they have a genuine desire to be interested. So it's not about dumping everything they know out there, which is what an extrovert trait is. It's more about having that backwards and forwards conversation and being interested. And tell me more about that. Help me understand that. And so again, whilst it's not creativity in that great big sense, again, there's a kernel of creativity in inquiry and in curiosity and in a willingness to listen, not just talk.
Yeah, and I mean, something that a conversation that happens a lot in sales circles is the active listening.
Yeah.
And that fits in exactly into this, because without active listening, without thinking about the questions that you're actually asking and improving that piece of the process, you don't get the insights. And it's the insights that actually provide a solution at the end of the day. Walk the seller, the buyer through the process.
Absolutely. And then, you extend it a little bit further. When you hear the response from the prospect or from the buyer, a lot of the kind of less experienced and all the less capable salespeople feel the need to fill the void with some kind of sound, some kind of noise, right? And extroverts absolutely are uncomfortable with silence, whereas the ambivert will take what's just been said, literally kind of reflect on that for a moment, and they'll then start to be tapping into the creative piece and their intellectual capacity to understand what's just been said, and then possibly to ask another question to get deeper insight or deeper understanding, or they may then, pose a response that's appropriate. But that moment of silence is them going into their brain, and it's them tapping their intellectual capacity and that little bit of creativity that's needed right here, right now, to make sure I've understood what was just said, and to then go forward, right?
Yeah. I don't know what the answer to this is, but something that just sprung to mind is when I was working in retail, you go to, at the end of the conversation, I was selling TVs, those kind of things for a sort of Harvey Norman style company in the UK. But at the end, you had to pitch, the insurance policy and the brackets or whatever it was, the additional things. But I was very good at that. And purely because I would make the pitch and sit in silence and let them make their decision and not butt in again. Is that similar to what we're talking about here?
Yeah, absolutely it is, because an extrovert will have difficulty doing that. Right? Extroverts, and as you get up in the 9s and 10s, abhor a vacuum, right? And silence is a vacuum. And so you'll often see it with a lot of salespeople where they'll ask what I call the triple barrel question. They'll ask the question and then state it again slightly differently, and then state it again slightly differently. And in some cases, they even begin to pose the possible answer, right? The person who's more ambiverted is going to have a comfort with posing the question and leaving it out there and letting the other person respond. So, yeah, definitely in there.
Yeah. So the next one we've got is manageability. And I like this one because there's two sides to the coin when it comes to manageability. There's the environment in which a manager is managing someone, and then there's the individual in terms of what their character traits are and what they're more likely to respond to. Is that correct?
Yeah, it is. And this is not my tool, so I don't get to change the label. But if I was going to change the label on this one, you'd love this one, because this one would be called creativity. Right? So this one is absolutely and utterly about the inherent creativity that's hardwired, hard-baked into the individual, right? So on the right-hand side, in that kind of 6 to 10 zone, those people are, and as you go further and further right, they are strict adherence to the policies, the procedures, the precedents, the guidelines, the rules, the way we do things around here. Somebody who's at a 10 for manageability will ask permission to ask permission, right? Go to the left-hand side. 1s and 2s we describe as rule breakers. 3s and 4s we describe as rule benders, right? And so what we're finding with the top quartile performers is they land on 3, 4, or 5. So they will have a level of respect and regard for the way we do things around here, and what the playbook says we're meant to do. Yet at the same time, inherently within themselves, they've got a natural ability to be creative in the moment. And so what you kind of see with 3, 4, 5s is adaptability. Right, because the rule breaker, rule bender thing can sound a little bit kind of disconcerting and a little bit negative. So I tend to describe it more as adaptable, creative in the moment, a capacity to look at things differently, and in particular in a sales situation, to kind of quickly work out whether or not something can be, in some ways, redirected or newly crafted that's going to help the sale start to move ahead, right? And so, when you think about it from a job ad perspective, I mean, you can't for one moment imagine anybody writing a job ad that goes up on Seek that says, I'm looking for somebody who's unruly, who keeps challenging me, and, who is not naturally inclined to use our playbook. I mean, you're never going to write that. But the truth of the matter is that's actually what you need to be looking for, right? And this one kind of blows people away a little bit, we find. But it's about being creative. And again, in today's environment where it's much, much less paint by numbers, where you're not turning up with a preconceived solution to something, almost everything has to be in some ways tailored or customized to meet the ICP's situation, then this is the piece that helps out with that.
At this point in time, I'd love to get a little bit deeper on this so that people can sort of have a metaphor to understand this manageability thing.
Mm-hmm.
And there's a story that you tell about the rules of the road that I think ties in really well to this idea. I'd love to hear from you now.
Sure. So, the fact of the matter is, at the end of today, assuming you or I and anybody listening to this or watching this hops into a car and heads somewhere, presumably home, notwithstanding that there are some variations from one state to another, but the fact of the matter is we're all subject to pretty much the same rules of the road, right? We all know we've got to drive on the left-hand side of the road if we're in Australia. We all know that a solid line in the middle means you can't overtake. We all know that number that's surrounded by a circle is the maximum speed you're allowed to drive at on that road. And yet, I guarantee, pounds to peanuts, every single one of us has probably got a different driving style, right? And so with the manageability piece, on the one hand, yes, if you bring someone on who's a 3, 4, 5, on occasions they're going to appear to be a little bit kind of resistant to how you want things done. They're not going to be doing it your way. And, my advice to you is share with them what the rules of the road are. Have them be very, very clear about, what side of the road they drive on, what does the double solid line in the middle mean, et cetera, et cetera. But then appreciate that, they need to be allowed to use their style within those kind of guardrails, as it were. People who are 3, 4, 5, like I say, they are appreciative of the rules. They do understand why rules exist. But on occasion, they're actually going to come up with a really good idea that you haven't thought of before that's actually going to be the difference between winning or losing this sale. And you probably need to allow some variation for that.
Yeah. Love it. The last one, bonus, customer centricity.
Yeah, and look, for the people watching this, obviously, you've been seeing weird numbers because this is not a numerical order. So these were 5 slides that I grabbed for Brad to have a look at over a bigger presentation that I did a while back. But yeah, so the customer centricity piece, what is actually measured here? So I've put a different label on here than is on the tool. On the tool, it's called accommodation, right? So it's the degree to which we are naturally inclined to bend to the will of others and to accommodate their needs, et cetera, right? And so, people who are in customer success, customer service, customer support typically will be over around 7, 8, 9. And people who are at 9 and 10, often as not, will be outside of the kind of workspace, but as a generalization, that they will be obsessed with not pissing people off, right? Come across, though, to the top quartile bunch, and they're all sitting on 3, 4, 5, which again means that, yeah, okay, I've heard what you've said, Mr. and Mrs. Prospect. I understand what your needs are. I understand why it is that you're requesting that. However, we're probably not going to be able to do it exactly as you're asking for. And again, so right here, right now is where the moment of creativity has to kick in, and that is what I can offer instead is what we are prepared to do instead is. Now, some of that might already be prescribed. It might already be in their, operating guidelines as to what they can and can't do. We know that reps certainly that are selling products, say in manufacturing organizations, often as not are given some scope as to discount that they can give. But what happens here is the natural inclination of this group of people is to not just automatically give, right? But is to come up with something that is And it's again the hackneyed phrase. It's about creating the win-win. But notice that preface word, creating the win-win. So the creativity piece is definitely in here as well, right? And I think I shared with you when we were speaking about this the other day that, I'm reminded often here of the Henry Ford saying, is attributed to saying that you can have your Model T Ford in any color you like, so long as you like black, right? So these guys probably aren't quite as rigid as that. That's probably more a 1, 2, 3. Yeah, but the 3, 4, 5s are the folks who will, again, and none of this operates in isolation. It's all colliding together. It's having, system dynamics effect going on here. So it's all kind of going off at the same time. But they're using this piece of their nature to be comfortable to say, let me think about that. You know what? I don't think we're going to be able to do that. So it gives them the comfort to be able to do that, right? Because it's in their hardwired nature. Whilst at the same time, what they're then going to do instead is go into the creative recesses and say, so what could we do that's going to please you, that's going to move this forward, that's going to get this across the line?
Because in a way, as we've gone through this and explored creativity, we've almost gone through the sales cycle, and this has landed directly firmly in the negotiation phase of the sales cycle.
Yeah, 100%.
So applying that lateral thinking again, sitting with space, sitting in silence and considering what an actual solution is that's going to create that win-win in the negotiation phase is a part of it as well.
Yep.
So I'm just going to close this off and then bring us back up.
Mm-hmm.
Thanks for taking us through that. I hope that was nice and clear for everyone at home. But something that I really like about what we went through, the idea of the introvert and the extrovert and the ambivert. I'd love to have a quick chat about what that means in terms of a selling style. The extrovert, the guy that goes out, gets on the phones, walks the street, constant. The ambivert might be a little bit more selective about the sales approaches, maybe a little bit more quality versus quantity approach. I know that you are a big fan of LinkedIn. You would consider yourself an ambivert as well.
Mm-hmm.
And one of the things that you talked about in the prep interview, and I resonated with it as well, was the idea of having a comfort zone that you sit in, that you can communicate through. For yourself, for myself, I like being able to communicate with a whole bunch of people and then jumping out of that comfort zone into a more extroverted state, whether that be doing something like a podcast or jumping on the phone for that little bit. I'd love for you to talk about your experience selling as an ambivert through a platform like LinkedIn and how you manage that.
Yeah. So first thing I'll throw in is I'm actually not an ambivert. I'm an introvert.
Right.
And it's worthwhile mentioning that because I know a lot of people get uncomfortable with assessments like these because they feel as though it's putting me in a box, right? And so one of the things that I'll share with you, first of all, is, as I mentioned, we measure 18 things. And as you saw, the benchmark covers, generally a run of 3, right? So if you land in any one of those 3, then you're right on the money. We're also comfortable with people landing 1 left or 1 right? And they can do that on all of the 18 things that we measure. And so what that actually results in is there's over 8.8 million different styles of person that will show up who will still fit in the benchmark, right? So, if any variation within there, and as I say, 1 left and 1 right, still says, yeah, you're probably going to be okay to do the job. And so, what we tend to look for is anybody ideally who scores at least a 64% or greater match, right? So we're not looking for perfection, right? So I want people to feel comfortable about that. The bit that I'll add in there, and coming circle back to what you've just asked, is that so I'm an introvert, right? I'm actually quite deeply introverted, and that was part of my challenge in my high school days. I just wasn't good. I was socially awkward, right? But what I've learned in my adult years, and particularly as I've got into my own businesses and into sales roles, is I sure as hell can't be an introvert and have any level of success in selling. Whether I like it or not, I'm going to need to have some kind of communication with people, right? And so what is also true of a lot of people is that we will push ourselves on any one of those 18 things if we're intellectually smart enough and emotionally smart enough. So that's where the EQ piece comes in. We will push ourselves outside of that comfort zone for a period of time. The thing to understand, though, is that if you're wanting to do that for a sustained period of time, that's hard to maintain. If you're needing to do it on more than 3 of the 18 aspects, that's really hard to maintain, because all of a sudden I'm starting to behave in a manner contrary to who I actually am, right? So that causes burnout. But so for me as an introvert, LinkedIn was a gift, right? I've got lots of things to say. I've got lots of opinions. I mean, you can tell that just from how I've gibbered on this morning. I've got lots of stuff to share with the world, and I do so not with an intention of bombarding them and overwhelming them or being a smart ass or showing off. I genuinely want to share this stuff with people in the hopes that it helps them in one way or another, right? My capacity to do that via conversation is limited. Like, if I don't talk to another person at all today after having just done this with you, Brad, that would be just fine by me, right? But I've got this capacity, which I take advantage of 3 days a week, every week, week in, week out, to share my opinion and my views via the keyboard on LinkedIn, because I know that not everybody's got time or is not interested in reading the written stuff. Occasionally I'll do some video stuff as well. So I've learned to kind of use the platform in the manner that I know it works and suits the audience. But yeah, LinkedIn for me has been an absolute godsend. Like, when I think I shared this with you the other day, but when I first got into selling, your TAM was discovered in the yellow pages, right? You had no clue really about who the hell was who in there. You'd had to do the whole cold calling thing, et cetera, et cetera. LinkedIn today, and particularly with Sales Navigator, you really can absolutely quickly define who your audience is. And then it just gives you that capacity to share your knowledge with them, share insights, perhaps even share thought-provoking moments, which I do have a tendency to do. And so to get your stuff out there and socialized in the world, but without you having to actually be sociable, I love it. I honestly, I love it. And I shared with you, like I can't remember when I joined LinkedIn. It was in its early days, and so I joined it because I thought it was just, a clever resume. It wasn't really until 2018 that I cottoned onto the fact that it's essentially kind of like my Coca-Cola billboard at the top of William Street, right?
Yeah.
And so I've gone nuts with it since then. And it's resulted in the fact that up until recently, between 2019 and through to probably only a couple of months ago, I've never done an outbound sales call, not once ever, right? It's all been inbound inquiry, and these days, referral and repeat business. But yeah, it's so for me, the introverted salesperson, LinkedIn was an absolute game changer and lifesaver.
And I want to tie it back into what we've discussed today, because I'm sure if you identify as a creative person, we've gone through a lot of elements today. The optimism and resilience piece, capacity for learning, sociability, manageability, and customer centricity. If you identify as a creative person, or you identify as an introvert and ambivert, I'm sure throughout those different graphs, something's resonated. And in today's modern age, as a seller, there are so many different ways, so many different communication styles that you can adopt to get your message across. And I think that this idea of creativity and what we've been through today really lends itself to that out of the box lateral thinking. How am I going to get the attention of a customer? How am I then going to progress the deal? How am I then going to get to the negotiation phase and make it that win-win situation? So I just wanted to bring that in there at the end, because I think that LinkedIn specifically, selling through LinkedIn ties in really nicely with these 5 core elements of creativity that we've discussed today.
Yeah.
Go
Yeah.
on.
Yeah, I wholeheartedly agree, obviously, right? I've put a post up this morning, which then promotes a long-form post that I've done. It's the first long-form post I've done in quite a long time. But I'm in there, I'm talking about the difference between pull and push marketing and selling, right? And how the pull piece works so well on LinkedIn, because you get to show your expertise, et cetera. Add into that now the fact that the platform really is actually encouraging us to be creative in how we present our material and our content. And I saw a fantastic post this morning, and I'll recommend everybody go and look Leanne up. So Leanne Hughes, who's here in Australia, put up, I think it was a 3-minute video, which is her speaker's show reel, right? So she's a speaker, a keynote speaker of note, and she's just created her 2025 show reel, and it's quite different. It's quite different to what you normally see from keynote speakers. But what really hit me was the brightness of it, the vibrancy of it, and the creativity of it. Yeah, and so the platform really does encourage, everybody who's creative to have a crack and stand out.
Yeah. I like that idea of push-pull. If anyone's listening and haven't listened to the previous podcast, we spoke about the more magnet principle, which is exactly that, the idea of attracting customers rather than actively going out and getting them. So if you want to get into that, I would go back and listen to the previous podcast that we've just done.
Cool.
Last couple of things. James, what wisdom would you impart on a young person that's entering the workforce today?
Wow. Yeah. I mean, at the end of the day, I hate this phrase, right? There's a phrase out there that is, your network is your net worth. I hate the language in that. But the fact of the matter is, connections count today. Who it is that you're speaking with, taking advice from, sharing ideas with, using as wise counsel, as a sounding board, creating safe space with, makes all the difference in the world. And so, yeah, I think the more you can be thoughtfully putting together, your network, and I mean that, importantly, thoughtfully, not just willy-nilly kind of connecting with people because they exist. I think
not
that's
followers, deep connections.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think that's vitally important, for a whole host of reasons. Yeah, sure, some of it's going to open doors, but also, life can deal up shit from time to time, and having people that you can have a conversation with in one form or another, outside of, the kind of the closed environment you might find yourself in when it's not nice and it's not comfortable, it makes all the difference in the world.
Yeah. It's a tough one. It's an interesting landscape that young people find themselves in now. Like, you're in your 60s now. The hindsight, growing up without the internet, actually had to force yourself out there to network in the real world. And now we're in a position where we're almost stuck behind our computer screens, and networking is almost like a chore. There are limited opportunities to get out there and meet with people face to face. And I think that what that idea of creating relationships really gets down to in the crux of is forcing yourself out of your comfort zone to seek relationships with people in the real world, whether you meet them digitally or not. James and I have met on LinkedIn, but really forcing yourself out there to network for the purpose of creating real relationships rather than follow account.
Yeah. And probably to wrap that up, and I don't know if this will connect perfectly or not, but Abraham Lincoln once said, "I don't like that person. I should get to know him better."
Yeah, no, I think that does. I mean, personally for me, I've traveled around the world and I've had a great little existence as up until this point. And I've met all sorts of people from different cultures, different backgrounds. Selling has allowed me to continue doing that daily, even though I'm not traveling. Do you know what I mean? But you never know who you're going to meet. You never know what kind of slight insight that you're going to get from someone that could potentially change everything.
Yeah.
Could change the direction of how you see the world, could change the direction of your selling approach. Yeah, you never know. The last one, the final question that we close with every time. What is your definition of creativity, James?
For me, creativity is a state of being curious, of being open to exploration, with a view to then building something, bringing something, doing something that doesn't necessarily have to be life-alteringly different. It could just be an iteration, right? But it's about, for me, getting into that state of curiousness. You know, one of the things that I love about us human beings, and it's one of the things that absolutely distinguishes us from almost every other living creature on the planet, and that is this thing called our imagination, right? When you look out right now, literally, you know, wherever you are as you listen to this or you're watching this, as you look out around you right now, pretty much everything that falls into your eyesight, into your vision, at some stage was an idea in somebody's mind, right? This platform that we're on right now, this conversation that we're able to have right now, the capacity to do this a number of years ago was just an idea in somebody's mind, right? And curiosity kind of triggered that. So, yeah, it sounds a bit waffly. Not sure I've really answered it, but that's my start.
Yeah, it's a difficult question. I love the answer. James, where's the best place to find you if anybody listening to this podcast wants to reach out?
LinkedIn's where I hang out, you know, the most, in terms of them being readily accessible. You know, if people go there, you'll find all of my contact details on there. I don't hide my phone number. I don't hide my email address. I'm happy to get as much spam as anybody wants to send me. I'm always hungry. But yeah, LinkedIn's the best place to find me.
Great. Look, it's been an absolute pleasure speaking to you. Thanks for sharing all your insights today. I hope you enjoyed it.
I did.
And yeah, we'll look forward to speaking to you again, mate.
Likewise. Good on you. Thank you, Brad.